I welcome this bill, as I know most speakers in this debate have, and I congratulate the Minister on bringing it forward. This is an issue that has been around for an awfully long time, and I think back to some of my own colleagues in the legal profession who fought this battle decades ago, establishing in the courts the discrepancies in the way in which different people are paid different amounts of money for the work that they were doing. And I think they deserve great credit, and many of them are still in practice and still fighting that battle. But it is, I think, very difficult for us to understand why it has taken this long to bring solutions here. But I praise you, Minister, for the work that you've done and the commitment you've given to it. To answer some of the questions that were raised earlier, I think it's very important to acknowledge that this is the beginning of a body of work that is hopefully going to bring a resolution to this issue, but it is not the solution in and of itself. It isn't a panacea to discrepancies in pay rates. And I also heard what Senator Mullins said about the fact that this was not voted against by any TD when it went through the Dáil. I don't agree with him that that's a reason for scepticism. In fact, sometimes when legislation goes through, we actually are all ad idem on it because it makes sense and it's the right thing to do, and that's sometimes why legislation isn't challenged. But I read the European Commission report a number of years ago that came out and that dealt very starkly with the different pay rates and specifically the gender pay gap in Europe amongst the various member states. And at the time I read it, I had some difficulties with the methodology they had employed, and I know it's very popular in politics today to say I've travelled a journey on this issue, and it's easy for me to say that as somebody who wasn't subject to the gender pay gap. And I know myself, when I was an employee in the private sector in the past, I know that it existed. I certainly know, looking back now, friendly with people who were working with me, women who were not paid the same rate as me. So I do see that it happens. One of the difficulties I had with the European Commission report was that it didn't allow for example, the number of years worked by a person who had taken maternity leave, for example. And I now realise in retrospect that it shouldn't either have taken account of that, because there is a fundamental unfairness and inequity in saying that somebody should be penalised for being a parent, essentially. And the fact that only women can bear the biological burden of giving birth to children and taking the maternity leave and creating that bond in the early years with a child, there is a fundamental unfairness in saying that they should be penalised in terms of their work status thereafter. And I think that's very important for us to recognise, because I think it's one of the areas, and it is just one of the many, because so many members have talked about so many different areas in which women are discriminated against in the workplace. But it's one area, for example, particularly over the course of a longer career, and particularly in the higher paid professional and multinational positions where women suffer. They take time out to avail of maternity leave, and we have many times, even in the last year since I've become a senator, in this chamber talked about the benefits and the importance of providing leaves to both parents, and to facilitate those early years with parents. It is so wrong that we would penalise those people for taking the opportunity to be a parent in that context. But more than that, it's also important that we not disincentivise parenthood, and we not disincentivise people who occupy that particular position, because we need them to take on that role. We need them to provide the workers of the future, the taxpayers of the future, the pension payers of the future, and that's tremendously important. But one other thing that I think is tremendously important to mention in the context of this debate, and I bring myself back to January 2020, during the general election campaign in Dún Laoghaire. All of the candidates were invited to a hustings in Loreto Foxrock, which is a girls' school in Foxrock near where I live. And in the course of that hustings, one of the girls that were 4th, 5th and 6th years at that asked what we would do about the gender pay gap. And I thought first of all, the response from one of the right-wing candidates in the election, who subsequently came last in the election and lost his deposit, suggesting that the pay gap was a myth, was enlightening on the first. But I think much more importantly than that, the fact that young girls like that, who were certainly not in full-time employment, were aware of the issue and understood that issue and were willing to raise that issue, gave me great hope for the fact that in the future, while we require employers to take note of this, and we require government to take note of it, and the IHREC to take note of it, and society to take note of it, we also need employees to know their rights and to stand up for their rights and to question it when they know they are subject to a pay gap that is based on gender or some other spurious ground. And it gave me great hope that there was a young woman in that position raising that issue, fighting that battle, and I hope she will continue to do so when she becomes an employee. But congratulations, Minister, and I look forward to the passage of the legislation.